Hello YouTube and welcome back to World of Warships with Wadres. And, well, today's video is a little bit on the special side because I have finally managed to get enough coal together to unlock the Tier 9 Premium US battleship, the USS Georgia. This is the ship that has somewhat been taking the servers by storm, if I dare say so, lately. Primarily because of her similarities to the Iowa class, or basically being a Iowa class with some traits from both the Yamato and the Massachusetts just thrown in for good measure. She has 457mm guns, which are notable for the capability of penetrating up to 31mm of bow armor. They don't quite hit that 32mm threshold of, say, the Yamato's main guns, but they get really damn close. They are very heavy, they are hard-hitting, and for a battleship with a 25-second base reload, these are also relatively fast reloading main guns. They are basically on par in a lot of ways with the Iowa, Massachusetts, Missouri, as far as their basically just being the upgraded version, or the next size up version of the standard 16-inch or 406mm cannons that you are used to seeing on U.S. Navy battleships. Now, these 18-inch cannons are also the same ones that you would be seeing on the USS Ohio once she has been fully developed, tested, and everything. And those of you who are aware of things going on with the game also know that the Ohio is the Tier 10 American battleship that is being proposed as the premium reward for the whatever it is they're calling it now. I think it's the Research Bureau instead of Naval Training Center, as far as choosing to regrind one of your or even multiples of your ship lines. Now, getting back to discussion of the Georgia, however, she is a little bit of a unique ship, to say the least. She has quite a number of interesting traits, if I dare say so. Not the least of which is her main battery armament. That is definitely a interesting trait, but it is definitely not the only unique feature. For an American battleship, she has the speed boost consumable, which I think is slightly improved. It's not necessarily like the good 20% French speed boost, but it is still a nice strong speed boost at the very least. Her heel is more in tune of that of the USS Massachusetts, and also her secondary armament is reasonably strong as well, being more similar to that of the USS Massachusetts as well, as opposed to that of the Iowa or the Montana, as far as their overall dispersion and accuracy. That aside, however, her health pool is basically the same as that of the USS Iowa because her hull is the same design, everything. The only substantial difference is just she has a few differences in how she behaves, and the biggest difference is just the adjustment to the larger size main battery cannons. Everything else is basically the same as you would expect to see on the Iowa, North Carolina, Massachusetts, what have you. And her health pool again is assigned in the same way as that of the USS Iowa. Even her AA specifications are basically the same as the Iowa's, copied and pasted. Now, all of this does lend to the simple fact, especially with regard to her unique secondary layout, among other things. Well, maybe not necessarily unique layout, but definitely her more accurate secondary weaponries, that actually lends this ship a couple of very differing builds. You can set this ship up as a standard semi-survivability battleship build. I mean, there's certainly no problem with that. You can also set her up as the long-range artillery platform that she is very capable of being by choosing a couple of the upgrade modules that extend her main battery range in lieu of secondary battery upgrades. And you can also tailor her captain to either the anti-air, secondary, or survivability skills again. And the first match that you're seeing here, I actually went for the long-range artillery build rather than anything else, and it definitely played out in my favor. In fact, I think it's actually the best of the matches that I had in the Georgia, which, granted, it could just be due to the fact that maybe the next two matches aren't exactly the greatest, but personally, I think she performs very well, more built for the long-range artillery than for her secondaries. And the reason I say that is because while her secondaries are decent, they are very similar to those of the USS Massachusetts secondaries that people have come to know and love, at least as long as you're not on the receiving end of them, I suppose. But here's the thing. For U.S. battleships, building for your secondary armament really isn't the best thing to do for some of your battleships, as far as I've seen, unless they happen to be ships like the USS Massachusetts. And part of why I say that is because the Massachusetts at Tier 8 can still see down to Tier 6, which her secondary build against Tier 6 ships is more than viable. And there's definitely something to be said for how quickly she can work her way through destroyers as well. But when she starts facing off against, say, higher tiers, and to which I also have to reference the fact that the Georgia can only see down to about Tier 7, where some of the armor values really start changing. And unless you opt for, like, IFHE skills, you're really not going to see those secondaries doing a whole lot of damage against more heavily armored targets like battleships or heavy cruisers, because the armor threshold is a lot higher at the higher tiers. The Massachusetts against a Montana is not going to see quite the same results as it will against, say, a Fuso or another Tier 6 battleship. So there is that to consider. Again, more of the issue for battleships for the secondary armament skills, though, are kind of tailored towards, like, say, dealing with destroyers that get a little bit too close, and I can understand that, and it's definitely a viable. I think the word I'm looking for is, I'm not wanting to say excuse. It's very viable reasoning. However, first, the destroyer has to be able to get close enough to you in the first place. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but you also have, when you're going for the secondary build, you also have to be very capable of making sure that you are actually selecting that target instead of just letting them... you have to have actually opted for manual secondaries. So there is that, and if you're a skilled player who knows exactly what you're doing, that's all power to you. I certainly try to do my best with it when I work with it, and it definitely at least seems to work out for me most of the time. As long as I'm not getting too much into the battle with my main battery and just completely forget my secondaries in the first place. Anyway, as you can see going through the battle results, this was not a bad match by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, 146,000 damage done overall. Secondary batteries even got a say, even though it wasn't actually a secondary battery build, just to kind of show that these secondaries are at least still viable without a secondary battery build, just not quite as good as it could be. But the long-range artillery definitely, I think, suited me a lot better over the course of this match, because most of the targets that I engaged were at longer range, So going for some of the long-range artillery mods, which also affect some of the dispersion ellipses, so on and so forth, definitely helped tighten up my groupings and just made it a little bit more consistent from the overall long-range artillery bombardment standpoint. And that's something that I definitely have to say I think I will enjoy about this ship moving forward. Because again, the secondary batteries, as I was saying a little bit, they really aren't that phenomenal just because they are still the standard 127 millimeters that you get for the secondaries for just about all of the U.S. battleships above the North Carolina. And, well, again, their armor penetration threshold isn't as good without delving into the whole IFHE, and that's skill points that I think are just better used elsewhere. Now, having said that, the remaining 2 matches for this video are done with the secondary battery skills taken into account, as well as all of the proper secondary battery upgrade modules to affect the dispersion, range, etc., as well as all of the relevant captain's skills for the secondary batteries. So you are going to see a very substantial difference in the performance of the secondary batteries as a whole. But again, keep in mind that in order to do this, because the upgrade modules do share some of the same slots, I'm losing some of my main battery operability. I think it's the artillery plotting room, among other things, which it decreases my overall main battery firing range. It affects my dispersion, and it does kind of hurt just a little bit as far as the main battery goes. And in a number of respects, I think I'm also going to just come right out and say that I think it hurts the main battery just a little bit too much. Now, granted, I do still have my spotter plane, but the spotter plane takes my main battery out to 24 kilometers with the spotter and the, dare I say, worst dispersion, whereas the main battery before, in the previous match, without the spotter plane actually up in the air, was at 23 kilometers, but that was also with the proper main battery upgrade modules, and the spotter probably pushed it out closer to like 25, 26, 27 kilometers. So it does make her lethal over a much greater range. And, well, as you can already see, the secondaries are already going because they are pushed out to the 11.6 or 11.3 kilometers. That is somewhat standard with your secondary builds on the German battleships, among others. But again, you'll notice that just the consistency of the shells landing on some of these other targets, like, say, the St. Louis, yeah, I was hitting it, but I don't think I was doing a substantial amount of damage to it. And the other thing is, the only thing I think I actually managed to do the St. Louis with my secondaries was actually set fires. I don't think I actually really had any substantially damaging shots against that St. Louis. Again, just because these are still the 127s, no IFHE skill applied, and it just kind of suffers without the IFHE. Now, I do not have the capability of respecking any of my commanders, really, at least not freely, for testing purposes, so I did not do another match with the IFHE skill taken. That being said, I just don't think it would actually change much overall. I mean, yeah, it would at least pass the threshold where the secondaries would at least cause more damage to, say, superstructures. But as far as that crossing that critical, say, 32 millimeter marker that you're looking for with some of your secondaries, in some cases, it wouldn't pass that. So I might see a little bit of an improvement going for again, where a lot of the secondary battery shells tend to hit anyway. But again, as I said, I feel like it's a wasted skill. I strongly feel like it would be a wasted series of skill points. I would definitely much rather invest in my AA skills for the U.S. battleships, which are known for having very decent anti-air suites, than investing in the secondary batteries, which personally I think just kind of feel lackluster. But again, some of you may find it differently. That's just kind of my 2 cents on the matter. Overall, just due to her similarities to the Iowa, the Missouri, I think the Georgia is much better suited to being tailored for the U.S. battleship's known strengths, which, again, those are the AA suites and their main battery. They're especially accurate main batteries. Now, I'm not going to say they're phenomenally accurate. I mean, Lord knows the Yamato has better sigma values, but all that really is the probability of going towards the center of the dispersion ellipse. The U.S. battleships are still notoriously well known for having somewhat tighter dispersion ellipses relative to their counterparts. So it depends on how you define the accuracy. Are you defining it as their probability of hitting that dispersion ellipse, or are you counting it as just how accurately their shells can be grouped? And personally, I would rather term the accuracy as just by how tight your dispersion grouping is, rather than your sigma values. So that's, again, my 2 cents on an issue. And again, while your secondary batteries could potentially, say, work over a Shokaku very quickly, how often are you really going to be in a situation where you're going to be wanting your secondaries to be going at it when you've really just got your main batteries that can do the work for you and do a shit ton more damage in the process? Now, I know, despite the fact that I've got my disclaimer and everything up, there are some of you who are going to say, well, you can't exactly get an effective review out if you're doing co-op matches. And you know what? Some of you may be right. But the one thing I can say with absolute certainty is that I could not even dream of saying that my review was competent if I had not at least given the secondary battery method a try. Again, personally, I found that it really just doesn't work for me over the course of the 2 matches that you're going to see here. The first one is finishing up, and I mean, these secondary battery numbers, they're not, I mean, yeah, okay, I'm seeing some numbers that are reasonable, but then I'm also seeing numbers like against this Vladivostok, where the number of shells that hit were just not really there for the amount of damage that was done. Or the amount of damage that was done wasn't really on par with the numbers that were hit. It just, I felt like they could have done more for a secondary build. And I just, again, I feel like if I had put the numbers into, or the skill points into IFHE, that it wouldn't have really changed much of anything. So, and again, others may find it differently. That was just my experience. That was my take on it. And as such, I'm definitely going to continue playing her as I would any of my other U.S. battleships, where I'm tailoring more towards, again, that long-range artillery platform and trying to tighten up my dispersion to just bring out that characteristic U.S. battleship accuracy. Something else that I'm not sure if any of you have noticed, really, just because I haven't been credited with many of the aircraft kills, is that my AA over the course of the 3 matches, with the exception of the first one, has actually been getting a reasonable workout. Both the second and third match, I do upwards of 25,000. In fact, for the third match, I do more than almost 30,000 hit points worth of damage to enemy aircraft over the course of the entire match. I think the first match was a little bit lousy just because the aircraft carrier kind of didn't go anywhere near me, and or at least by the time it did start trying to give me some attention, its squadrons were already not especially healthy. So the first match I only got about 10,000 hit points worth of aircraft damage dealt. But otherwise, the other two matches, the second match, the third match here, the numbers just tick away, and it definitely starts adding up over time. Now, keep that in mind. I am doing substantial amounts of damage to enemy aircraft. The one thing that I am not being credited for are aircraft kills, which I think are going towards a couple of the cruisers that are closer to me, or maybe even the, like say the Harugumo maybe up in front of me. Lord knows the Harugumo is much stronger in its AA than it was before the AA rework ever went through. So there is that to have in the back of your mind as well. Yes, my my anti-air batteries are doing damage. I'm just not getting the kill shots. So there is that to be mentioned. And again, the U.S. battleship anti-air suites, that they are phenomenally powerful against anti-air or against aircraft. And any aircraft carrier who plays the game, even now, will understand that going after American battleships is just one of those things that you really don't do, especially early in a match, just because they have, they have historically well respected anti-air suites that are more than capable of melting entire squadrons very quickly. Granted, there are exceptions, like some of the French battleships. I'm looking at the Jean Bart and the Republique. But even so, the U.S. battleships have always been unique in the simple fact that they have had very phenomenal AA suites going back to the initial stages of the game. The U.S. battleships were ships that you just did not go after in any of the early stages in the game, even with the RTS CVs, just because they would chew your planes up and spit them back out. And they would do it all day long, especially when the manual AA skill was taken and capable of pinpointing a specific squadron instead of the current AA sector stuff that we deal with. So it is definitely a consideration to have in mind, is just building the Georgia as well instead of going for the secondary batteries or even for the main battery range to set it up for anti-air combat and just basically be a menace to any aircraft carrier that happens to have the misfortune of being stuck on a map with you. Having gone over all of this, again, just in brief summary, the USS Georgia plays very similar to the Iowa. She has all of the U.S. battleship's strengths and, in some ways, kind of covers some of their weaknesses as well, with the speed boost, the more Massachusetts-style heel, more accurate secondaries, but she also still has a lot of those same weaknesses. And that is just one of those things that you're going to have in the back of your mind. She is still very much a U.S. battleship, playing very similar to the USS Missouri, the USS Iowa, and even the USS North Carolina down at Tier 8. And while she's definitely a much bigger target than, say, the Massachusetts or the Alabama, she even operates very similar to them. So she is, again, just very, very much your standard U.S. Navy fast battleship sort of design. Now, granted, that's actually one of the things that I can say unequivocally that I love about the Georgia, is She is so similar to the US battleships that she is already exceedingly comfortable to play, even for game veterans. You're not really having to learn a new playstyle to work with her. So that can make her very appealing to a experienced player who's just looking for a new ship that's got maybe a little bit more firepower under her belt to add to their port. Having said that, I think I'm still probably going to stick with the USS Missouri, and not necessarily for the purpose of her credit printing abilities, as still being my favorite ship in the game. Just because the Georgia, again, she does have some idiosyncrasies that make her a little bit less, maybe a little bit less friendly, but honestly, I'd rather have more guns, personally. I'd rather still have those 9/16 inchers for when things get a little bit more up close and personal, because that's just simply more damage output that I have in a single salvo, rather than dealing with single hit damage. And even then, that's really only more, like, what, a couple thousand points more for a single hit, especially if you find a citadel. I'd rather have just more guns overall. But again, that's just me. Anyway, final match concludes with 95,000 damage, 201,000 credits, 1,634 EXP, 103 free EXP. I was only awarded for 15 main battery hits. Not that there was anything that really stayed in my line of sight for very long. Did get 4 kills, though, which I guess is something. Yeah, the Harugumo definitely got credited for all my aircraft kills, despite the fact that I think I did substantially more damage to aircraft than he did. Yeah, enemy Georgia absorbed a good chunk of damage, and I think that's where the citadels that I hit also came from, aside from maybe that one Cleveland that I just kind of bow-penned. But beyond that, I mean, definitely, she does not perform in any way that I would expect to see from any other, or that I would not expect to see from any other of the U.S. battleships, aside from the fact that she has slightly better overpen capabilities with those 457 millimeter guns, but that's really about it. Definitely nothing to my mind that really stands out and shines about her, aside from, again, just being a faster battleship with that speed boost consumable and having a faster reloading repair party. Anyway, I suppose I shall probably go ahead and let you all go at this point. I mean, I think I've said my piece, to say the least. So I shall go ahead, let you all go. If you have enjoyed the video, please do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And I do apologize for, I guess, some of the blatant honesty in my review here. But again, I don't feel she offers anything too terribly different from that of the Techline US battleships. And that, I can understand that's a good thing. Some of you, for a premium ship, may think that's a bad thing. That's for you all to decide. Anyway, on that note, have a good one, and I wish you all happy hunting. Stay safe out there, folks.